Welcome back to The Art of Adventure. This is episode 169, a Slovenia Adventure. This is a new type of episode, which is going to be all about a week trip in Slovenia. We are living in Croatia right now as a family, and we took a trip last week to Slovenia, and my friend Laden over at the Travel Wisdom podcast has been doing country updates when he goes to new countries, and so I got the idea from him that we do a country update about our week in Slovenia. There's some really amazing places, things to see, things to do in Slovenia. It's called the New Zealand of Europe for good reason. And so I'm going to highlight what we did each day and give you a quick little view into what it's like in Slovenia. So to jump right in, we had to leave Croatia for a week to extend our stay at the end of our time here. So we needed to get out of the country for a week. We asked a friend, should we go south to Bosnia and Montenegro, or should we go north to Slovenia and Austria? And Slovenia was the clear preference. I'm glad we got that recommendation because it's really amazing. So we rented a car and we drove to Slovenia. We did a quick trip to Austria to visit some friends and then back into Slovenia. So the first day we drove from Zadar, Croatia, where we're living, to Ljubljana. And that is about a 4-hour drive. And we gave ourselves 8 hours to do it because we have a baby. And first 2 hours to the border, he slept. We went across the border. I can't remember the name of the town, but Slovenia is in the Schengen zone in Europe. So once you get into the Schengen zone, you can travel freely between Slovenia, Austria, Italy, and all the neighboring countries without having to go through a border control. So that was exciting. It was Heidi and Axel and my first time to Slovenia. So we all got a new country. That makes 7 countries for Axel, and he's 7 months old, so he's on a roll. And so then we had 6 hours to do our final 2 hours of driving to Ljubljana, and we took the full 6 hours. There was lots of stops, lots of taking pictures of old churches and getting out for little walks. And as soon as you go from Croatia into Slovenia, you get into these small mountains, these rolling hills that are somewhere between the Ozarks and the Appalachian Mountains in size. This is southern Slovenia, so the Alps are in northern Slovenia, and we got there as well. And the first thing we did when we arrived in Ljubljana, we had an Airbnb. I picked one that was close to the center of town near the Dragon Bridge and Ljubljana Castle. And those were 2 things that I had seen on Pinterest when I just did a quick search of Ljubljana. We didn't know anything about Slovenia before we went. So it was a big adventure in that sense because we really were exploring. We were getting Airbnbs at the last minute, like sometimes the day before we were going somewhere. So we thought we might actually camp, but we only had a room in the car for so much. The rental car was small. So we didn't camp. So we were going the Airbnb route. It's easy to find Airbnbs throughout Slovenia. So that was helpful. So first thing in Ljubljana, we checked into our Airbnb and we walked down to the main part of the old town, which is beautiful. This reminds me sort of Vienna or, these other Prague places that the architecture is, a couple hundred years old, really nice houses lining the old town. Obviously, the city is much older than the castle. I think itself is 900 years old. We went to this open air market, and it was such a treat because in Croatia, we're able to find lots of pizza and fish, which is what pretty much every restaurant will serve you here. But in this market, this open air stall, there was, let's say, 100 different food stalls from all over the world. And I basically just went with the first thing that I saw because I was hungry, and it happened to be Ethiopian curry, which was amazing. And Heidi went and found Egyptian food, like an Egyptian burrito kind of thing. And so we're eating, and there's like music playing, and there's, 1,000 people milling around. It's sunset, and it's a really cool vibe. This is on a Friday night in the old center of Ljubljana. And we made sure to walk down to the Dragon Bridge, where there's these, they must be copper because they're green oxidized giant dragons on the corner of the bridges. And you'll see a lot of pictures of that if you look online, pictures of Ljubljana. So we got a picture of the dragon at sunset with the castle behind it. Really amazing. And that first night, just the proximity of the closeness, we only walked 15 minutes to make all that happen from our Airbnb through the old center. So the old part of town is small and walkable and beautiful and really enjoyable, great vibe. We fell in love with it immediately and said we could live here. That was before we even walked around the next day or saw the mountains or the surrounding countryside. So our one full day in Ljubljana, we wanted to see Ljubljana Castle, which sits up top of a hill overlooking the old city, and there's a river running through the old city. And the other thing we wanted to see was the Metelkova art colony, which is a former barracks that was squatted in 1993, and it's like 7 or 8 buildings that have been taken over by artists, and there's, I think, restaurants and just weird places to hang out. There's a hostel there, but it's essentially this huge art installation, graffiti, public sculpture park. So someone told us about that before we went. We wanted to make sure we saw that. We did go up and see the castle. We took the funicular, this like a little railway that just shoots you up the hill so that you're right in the castle, which was amazing. Toured around the castle. Up at the top of the tower, you can see 360-degree views of Ljubljana city, and you can see there's mountains actually quite close to the city. There's big city parks that are sort of hills in the middle of the city. So it's a very green city, very walkable. And again, this was just reinforcing us saying we think we could live in Ljubljana. And I'm already thinking like, oh, winter, we could ski. It's only an hour from the Adriatic, so you could go down to the coast, to the Mediterranean, and enjoy Mediterranean coastal living. It's a really perfect geographic location. So anyway, we see the castle, and then we walk. We're walking all day. It's very, very a lot of walking for us that day. Probably 8 to 10 hours of walking with plenty of stops for snacks and stuff. And the Metelkova is amazing. There's these huge graffiti exhibits. I'm borrowing a camera from my friend, a nice one, a Canon. So we're just taking lots of photos. I'm taking lots of photos. And that's pretty much all we did on that day, was see the castle, see the old part of the city from the other side, and see the Metelkova art. And we could have spent one full day at each of those things if you really want to give it its due. It depends on if you'd like to just see quick things or if you really want to go deep. But the second day really confirmed that we love this city. I forgot to mention in the mornings we were stopping at this cafe, the Le Petit Café, a French cafe where I was getting espresso with chocolate and a really good chocolate croissant. These cafes are everywhere, and they're different than the Croatian cafes. They're more like the Viennese coffee house culture, where people will, I guess the drinks are more fancy, more diversity than simply your espresso where you just drink it and go. So the final morning before we left Ljubljana, we were only there for those 2 nights. I ran into a high school friend, Andrew Elkins. He ran cross country with me in St. Louis, where I grew up, and we went for a run. We went running up one of those parks I had seen the day before from the castle, and it was really fun. It's so random to meet up with someone that you know from your hometown on the other side of the world and enjoy an hour together and then go your separate ways. We have a mutual friend, Chris Wright, who's been on this show before. And, you know, we have various connections, and maybe when I am in LA next, I will go visit Andrew. So that's, I really, really love meeting old friends or meeting people that listen to the show. So if you're listening to this and you find out that I'm going to be somewhere because you're seeing it on Instagram that we're going somewhere or on Facebook, send me a message and we will try to meet up. I try to have meetups when I'm going to be in a big city where I know there are lots of listeners, and we get together and we have dinner or drinks or something like that. So that's really fun. So that was the end of our first leg in Slovenia, was this trip to Ljubljana. We drove up to Austria for a few days to meet some friends of ours from Bali, and then we came back. So I'll restart here again when we come back in from Austria. I think I'll do a separate episode about Austria. So if you want to hear about Austria, we spent 3 days there. Check out that episode. It'll probably be the next one or a couple more. So Austria is in the north of Slovenia. We drove across into the Austrian Alps and spent a few days. And then we drove back south to Bled, Slovenia. Now, Bled is a town. The pictures of it are amazing. That's why we went. There's a lake with a monastery on an island in the middle of the lake, and on this big cliff overlooking the lake is a Castle Bled. And the whole thing is within the foothills of the Julian Alps. Those are the southern Alps that you find in Slovenia. So the whole thing is a very majestic view, just very photogenic place and magical looking. The land of dragons. When you see the photos, you think, oh, this is like where dragons lived. So we decided to go there. We only had one night since we were going to a castle later in our trip. I'm very excited about it. I'll tell you about that next. So we drove down to Bled from Austria. We actually stayed in a town a couple miles outside of Bled called Bohinjska Bela, and that was where we found another Airbnb built into the side of a giant cliff, kind of like Yosemite, like Half Dome, these big cliffs riding right up out of the valley floor. And our bathroom was literally in a cave. There were literally roots growing in through the side of the cliff in our bathroom. So that was really, really neat. We had dinner in Bled, and it was raining, and the sun was setting behind the castle, and it's sort of the rain was coming across the lake, but there was fire behind the castle in the sky, and it was just a really, again, we thought, oh gosh, this is the land of dragons. So we actually didn't spend that much time in Bled, which is a very touristy town, but we did spend more of our time in Bohinjska Bela. In the morning, we went for a walk around our neighborhood, and it was really, really cool just to be able to walk from our house up the mountain. We ran into some rock climbers. There's a rock climbing area, lots of sheer cliff faces right in town. There's all these pure troughs of water, the water flowing down from the Alps, and they have these open troughs in the city, in the town. It's probably less than 1,000 people in this town. These open troughs of water, of the most pure alpine drinking water. You can just dump your water bottle and fill it up right there. And we walked up the town. It's on a slope, and we found a waterfall. And there were these, in addition to the bluffs, the cliff faces, there's these giant pillars of rock. And we found a series of ladders that would take us up between the pillars of rocks. And we finally made it to the top, maybe 300 feet above the rock wall. So maybe 1,000 feet above the valley floor. And we had a panoramic view of the entire valley. It was so amazing. In this short walk in the morning, it was maybe only an hour and a half. We got up to this pillar. We saw the waterfall. We saw the rock climbers. We saw these helicopters doing military training. There's a training center up the valley. And we also went through a hike through the woods it's very, very alpine, lots of streams cascading down, steep, tiny little roadways. Very idyllic. And again, we thought, oh my gosh, Slovenia it's so amazing. It's not a big country. I don't know the population. Someone said it was only 1 million people in Slovenia. The size of the country, you can drive across it in 4 hours on the highway. So it's like the size of Missouri, the state where I grew up. Not super huge. And they've got Alps. And we didn't really even get to explore the best part, or so I'm told. The Socha River Valley is this turquoise river. And I was connected with a Slovenian blogger who said this is the best place in the entire world, and we didn't get to go. So that leaves the door open for a return to Slovenia. So at about noon, we left the Bled region and headed south to stay in a castle. The castle is called Grad Otočec, or the Hotel Castle Otočec. It's in the southern part of Slovenia, close to the border with Croatia. And they're actually sponsoring this podcast, and they sponsored our stay at the castle, which was amazing, in exchange for featuring the castle on Instagram and talking about them on the podcast, which I would love to talk about them either way, but we got to stay there for free. So just wanted to mention that. I'll actually be talking a little bit more about how I organize some of these benefits that I get for mentioning things on Instagram or the podcast. If you want to learn more about that, I think I'll have an upcoming product or mini course on that. Just a quick aside. So we go to this castle, and I've always wanted to stay in the castle, and Otočec was built in 1200 something. So it's pretty old. It's on an island in the middle of a river. It's the only castle like that in Slovenia. And it's one of the only castles. There might be a couple more that you can sleep in Slovenia. And so it's this really cool way of preserving a castle, because there's castles all along that river. It's the Krka River Valley in Slovenia. And there's castles all along, but many of them are in disrepair because castles are expensive to maintain. And if you're not using them for something, there's really no point in maintaining them. So a lot of them have gone into disrepair. But this one maintains its original exterior. It's been refinished on the inside to be a really nice 5-star hotel. And the grounds are great. There's pathways on either side of the castle on the island in the middle of a river. When I was a kid, about 8 or 9, we took a trip to England. And we spent a month with our family living in the Cotswolds. And I would walk around all day in a coat of armor, a little plastic armor suit for a kid. But I've always been fascinated with castles, and England is full of ruins. There's obviously nice maintained castles in England as well, but lots of ruins I remember climbing on and imagining what it would be like to live in a castle. So this dream of spending the night, of staying in a castle, has been over 20 years in the making. So I was very excited when we checked in. It's a small hotel. There's only 16 rooms or something, and you go, and in the reception there's a coat of arms and a suit of armor, and it's just incredible. You go through this big entrance gate to go into the castle. And right away, it transports you. It makes you feel like nobility, like I'm in a castle, la-di-da. So the first thing we did, we wanted to make sure we had plenty of time in the castle. And we spent a lot of time throughout our 3 days there around the grounds of the castle and enjoying the breakfast and things like that. But the first thing we did was we went out for dinner in the region. And the region itself is very agricultural, very wooded. I think more than 60% of the region is covered in forests. Everyone has a vineyard. Every house has a tiny little vineyard. Everyone makes their own wine. Their family makes wine. And no matter what their normal occupation is, they're producing wine. So there's vineyards everywhere, these rolling hills. I saw a ton of cyclists, and I was very intrigued by this as a cyclist. The pavement is really smooth. These rolling hills, very upsy, downsy, curvy. Would be really enjoyable on a bicycle or a motorcycle. And this dinner that we went to the first night, it was very fresh, local ingredients. We got all the local specialties. When we're in a new place, we sometimes ask, like, what's the local specialty or what's the restaurant specialty? And we got these buckwheat pasta rolls they look sort of like a cinnamon roll, but they're buckwheat pasta. And we had some steak and some lamb, and I think a pumpkin and mushroom salad. Anyway, amazing food, super cheap. I think the whole meal was like 3 or 4 courses, probably cost us 20 euros or $25. And this restaurant was like an open air restaurant. There was old time wooden wagons that Axel was playing on. By playing on, I mean I set him in the wagon because he's not big enough to play on things yet. And it just felt so fresh. We sampled a bunch of different local wines. Each glass is less than €1. It just had the perfect vibe. So the next day, this is our first full day at the castle. And I want to talk about one of the things that I enjoyed most about staying at the castle. We had the bed and breakfast package, which means this amazing local food buffet for breakfast, cured meats to fresh pear pie for breakfast. Yes, it was really amazing. You can see a photo of that on my Instagram. Delicious pie, fresh cooked vegetables. The whole vibe of it, right, it's a luxury hotel, and the waiters are very friendly. One of them brought coffee up to our room in the morning because I couldn't carry it all in my hands. So they're just really taking care of you. And when I think about luxury, I think of that I'd really like everyone to experience luxury of some form, whether that's actually staying in a luxury hotel. But if someone comes and stays at my house, I want to make sure they have everything they need, their towels. I want to give them the attention. I want to take them on a personal tour. I want to cook them the best dinner. I want to let them sleep in. I want to do all these things because luxury, in my mind, is this privilege of being taken care of for a little while, a day or a few days. If you live a life of luxury, obviously that's awesome for you. But you don't have to stay necessarily in a luxury hotel, something that's hundreds of dollars a night. But you can find bed and breakfast, Airbnbs even, that will give you the experience of really feeling privileged and awesome just for a moment. And it's a great experience to just appreciate quality. We don't really know exactly what quality means, but we know it when we see it. And we know hopeful and helpful, friendly and helpful hosts. We know when you're sleeping in a quality bed, when you have quality food and good ingredients and a good atmosphere. That's really all it takes to create this experience, this atmosphere of luxury. And that's pretty much what I felt at this castle at Otočec. In the afternoon, we took the recommendation of the host at the reception of the hotel to go to a local monastery. It's a huge monastery. They have 600 hectares of vineyards, and the roof space is 1.6 hectares. Like, this is a huge place, but there's only 9 monks that are living there. And these monks, they make award-winning wine. They make really good wine. So we went there to buy essentially holy wine. I don't know if it's made with holy water. I hope it is. When I drank it, I felt like I was drinking something really special. So we bought a few bottles for ourselves and our friends. Again, these are only like €2 a bottle for a liter of really amazing monk wine. And there was this 600-year-old chapel, church, Gothic cathedral that you could access. Most of the monastery you couldn't access, but in this cathedral you could go if you were a member of the public. And when you walk in, I think they have maybe like on a laser trigger some chanting of the monks, and it plays and it echoes throughout this cathedral, and it's very haunting and spiritual, and it just makes you feel so magical when you go in there. So we were actually the only ones in there at the time. So we sort of chanted along to the chanting that was playing, and it was very echoey, and just hearing your own voice and your own chanting reverberating off the walls of a 600-year-old church gave me chills. It was a really cool experience. Next to the monastery, there was a 200-year-old farmhouse, and we took it's now a museum, a pottery museum, and they had this kitchen, and the fire of the kitchen would go up and cure the meats in the roof of their house. And this tiny little house, obviously people back then were smaller and they didn't make houses as big, but that was cool to see traditional barn architecture, traditional farm, a 200-year-old Slovenian. And then in the evening, we went to a little town that's built entirely on an island. There's only 2 streets in the town, and we had another amazing local restaurant experience. Fresh food, fresh ingredients, not expensive, cheap wine. And that's really the theme of this region for me, is the connection that people have with the land. I would see people playing in the rivers, jumping off bridges, canoeing around, fishing right from their yards. I ran into a family of gypsies who were cooking a giant stew pot on the banks of the river, and they were fishing out of the river. And it just felt very medieval still in the sense that the land is more shared, more public, and more free range humans, if you will, in addition to the animals. We did see a lot of deer, a lot of stags bounding through the woods, things like that. Now we're on our final day, our third and final day at the castle, and there's another hotel, the Hotel Sport, which is owned by the same company as the people that manage the castle, Termakirka. And we went over there and took advantage of the saunas and the swimming pool. Very nice. I know that during the tour of Slovenia, the cycling tour, Team Bahrain Merida, the pro team stayed at this hotel sport. So people go there for training and rehab and things like that. It's not just like a spa hotel, but it's also a fitness oriented hotel. They have the tennis courts and the gyms and things like that. So really cool if you're into that. If you're a cycling team, probably a great place for a training camp because of the road riding around the area. So we spent the day lounging and getting ourselves sauna'd up, which after the sauna, it really wore me out. It was like getting a massage. And we had plans for dinner at the castle that night. Really, really nice 4-course dinner. But before that, we walked down the river about a kilometer we had met a friend of ours, Eleonora, a couple nights before. She was wearing traditional medieval lady attire. And she told us that she had this other castle called Stroga. So we walked down to Stroga and she gave us a tour and I got to try on a suit of armor. And this castle is different than Otočec in that it's not really a place you can stay, but everything is in period. The interior decoration is still in period. So 200 and 300-year-old furniture, from the writing desk to the banquet hall to the deer antlers to the bear rugs, very well preserved period castle. So that was super cool. And our final experience, our final piece at Otočec. So we only spent an hour at Stroga, and then dinner at Otočec was a 4-course meal, and it really highlighted the food from the region. So essentially, we got 3 nights in a row of sampling fresh food from the region, and the one at Otočec was by far the best. Really amazing, delicate flavors, blending of, I remember the use of honey on smoked duck. I remember truffle oil blended with cream cheese, right? And I'm keeping ideas like what can I do at home on my own. Amazing veal, homemade ice cream for dessert. All this, I didn't actually get to talk to the chef about where it was sourced, but obviously the herbs were super fresh and the ingredients. So what makes a really nice 4-course meal? The sauces, the presentation, the delicacy of the flavors, and the ingredients. Fresh ingredients really goes a long way to a quality meal. And that's something we found in Croatia as well, was that fresh local ingredients, they're largely non-GMO, not fertilized, not pesticides, just grown in a traditional way, organic food. Really great ingredients means you can cook really great meals. And that was our last night at the castle, and the next day we drove back home to Croatia. It was great. We had again, the beautiful breakfast. I took a run in the forest. Next to the castle, there's all these trails through the forest, and there was a red-tailed hawk or some sort of local hawk following me around as I was running. Very cool. Hawks seem to be following me around as I travel the world. I always run into them. Very interesting. And we had a leisurely checkout, very, very relaxed. So the whole experience at the castle was everything I hoped it would be. It also felt, by the end, kind of like home. Like you really get used to whatever you're experiencing. So whether it's you're camping or staying in a castle, you start to think like, oh, this is my normal life. And that's just your brain adapting you to where you are. So it's great to have special experiences where you go and get to experience something new and different. And staying in a castle was a first for me. And it was so cool just to be surrounded by turrets and suits of armor and doors that are smaller than you are, because that's how tall people were when they made the castle. So that's a wrap on the experiences of Slovenia. I probably left several things out, but that's an overall view of our week in Slovenia. There'll also be episodes about Austria, and then when we move on from Croatia, we'll do a big episode about living and traveling in Croatia. So I'd really love to hear what you thought about this episode, since it's a little bit different. It's just me telling you about our adventures. Hopefully it was useful. Hopefully you want to go see Slovenia now, because it really is a beautiful, diverse, forested, alpine landscape. Obviously we only went to 3 locations, but it was enough for me to think I'm willing to move to this country. Check out the show notes for lots of images. I'll have have some taken from Instagram and some additional ones I'll have in the show notes. And obviously, I am working as I travel. This was more of a vacation for me. I haven't really taken a vacation in about a year and a half, but I only worked a couple days on this trip, not including the photos and video footage I was taking of the castle itself. But it was so nice to have a vacation, and it was nice to have the freedom to be able to take a week off, which I haven't done in a really long time. So again, if you're thinking you are interested in this kind of lifestyle where you get to travel and work and sort of blend the two and have these experiences where you're learning as you go, you get to stay in new countries, experience new cultures, things like that. I really believe that the work we do and the freedom of the choices we make in our life are really important to our overall happiness. And so I'd love to help you figure that out for yourself if you're working towards starting a business, if you're working towards traveling with your family or becoming location independent or having time freedom in your day to structure it how you want so that you can sleep in or work out or spend time with your kids or whatever it is. Because I'm traveling with my family. I'm working at home most of the time with my family. So it's something I'm very passionate about. If you want to talk to me about this, I'll give you, a listener of the show, a 30-minute free strategy session. All you've got to do is send me an email, derek@derekloudermilk.com, or go to the coaching page on derekloudermilk.com and sign up for your slot. And we'll have a conversation and figure out what the next best steps or what your goals should be if you're not really sure what they are or if you have too many. Anyway, thanks so much for listening. Again, I'd love your feedback about the episode. Let me know if you're interested in going to Slovenia. It's an amazing place. Now it's your turn to go out there and be adventurous.